He was the kind of billionaire who feared nothing because he'd built a life where nothing could touch him. Not the board, not the press, not the storms that tore through the old Harrington Lodge like they wanted to expose every crack he'd buried for years. But that night, standing under a collapsing ceiling, Michael Harrington finally met the one truth he couldn't outrun. Power means nothing when your life has gone hollow. And then she walked in, not with charm, not with fear, but with a calm, unshakable fire that told him she had survived worse storms than he'd ever imagined. Elena Cruz didn't just challenge him, she held up a mirror to the man he'd become. And the man he was terrified of, still being. Here's the twist. For a man who controlled everything and everyone, she was the one person who turned his entire world inside out without even trying. If you've ever faced a moment where life demanded the truth you've been avoiding, this story will hit home. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, Michael Harrington thought the old lodge was trying to speak to him. A low hum passed through the beams overhead, followed by a shudder he felt beneath his shoes. Wind clawed at the windows with icy fingers, pushing sheets of sleet sideways across the glass. The storm had swept in from the Atlantic faster than the forecasts predicted, swallowing Harrington Point in a curtain of white. He had grown up with winters in Maine, but this one felt personal, like the kind of storm that made a man confront what he'd been avoiding. He moved slowly through the dim lobby, past the stone fireplace where a weak flame struggled to stay alive. The room smelled of wet wool, aging timber, and the faint bitterness of burnt coffee scents he knew too well after weeks of declining occupancy. A pair of guests near the front desk spoke in hushed but agitated tones. Their luggage sat beside them, wet at the edges. One gestured sharply toward the windows, toward the flicker of the lights, toward the worn carpet beneath their feet. Michael caught only fragments. Refund. Unsafe. Not what we paid for. The night manager noticed him and straightened. For a split second, she looked as though she might ask something of him, perhaps reassurance, perhaps direction, but then she lowered her eyes and pretended to busy herself with the computer. He didn't blame her. He didn't have reassurance to give. His phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, seeing the name flash across the screen. Richard Wallace, chairman of the board. He answered anyway. Michael, the voice crackled through poor reception. You promised a turnaround this quarter. We're not seeing one. Investors are restless. This property has become a liability. He shifted his weight, feeling the joints in his fingers twinge. The cold made the stiffness worse. The storm drove cancellations. We'll stabilize. Quote, we have commonets and a high. We have God, our. We've heard that before. You need to face the possibility that the brand needs new leadership, fresh ideas. Someone who isn't me. Michael finished quietly. A long silence stretched between the static. The call ended without goodbye. Michael slipped the phone back into his pocket and flexed his fingers, trying to shake out the ache. His doctor called it early-stage arthritis, stress-related. He called it a reminder, an unwelcome one, that he was no longer the man who once ran up these stairs, two at a time, full of certainty and ambition. That version of him felt as distant now as the sun hidden behind the storm. He stepped behind the front desk and opened the maintenance log. Pages filled with notes. Boiler issues, electrical flickers, guest complaints, delayed supply shipments. Harrington Point Lodge had been his father's pride, a place built on warmth and tradition, but time had worn it thin. The newer coastal hotels down the highway were sleek, modern, backed by aggressive marketing campaigns. He knew that. He'd known it for years. But he'd clung to the belief that history mattered, that the Harrington name still meant something. A gust of wind slammed against the front doors, rattling them in their frame. He looked up, startled, and saw his reflection faintly in the glass. Tired eyes, a few more gray strands than he remembered, the weight of a legacy sitting heavy on his shoulders. He crossed the lobby toward the old leather armchair near the fireplace. It had been his father's favorite, the place where he'd sit after long nights of ledgers and inventory checks, sipping black coffee and telling 10-year-old Michael that running a lodge was about people, not polish. The leather was cracked now, faded to a dull brown. Still, Michael found comfort in standing near it, a habit he'd never shaken. Another flicker passed through the lights. Then, a dull pop. Something gave way overhead. A single drop of water hit the armrest. Then another. Then a thin stream broke through the ceiling tile and splashed directly onto the chair's worn cushion. Michael stared at the water, pooling in the indentation where his father's shoulder once rested. The leak traced a thin path down the backrest, as if erasing a memory. For a moment, he couldn't move. The storm outside battered the windows with the force of waves, and yet the only sound he heard was the steady drip onto the leather. It struck him then, more sharply than any comment from the board, that the old lodge was failing in ways he could no longer patch over. The same way he had been failing in ways he could no longer deny. He stepped back, feeling something inside him shift. Not panic, not yet, but a heavy, sinking recognition. The Harrington name didn't protect him anymore. Legacy didn't shield him from change, and he could no longer pretend he was the kind of leader who could fix this alone. His gaze drifted toward the far corner of the lobby, where a stack of personnel files sat waiting for him on a side table. On top was a manila folder tied with a thin string, the profile of the woman he'd hired 3 weeks ago, the one his team insisted could save the brand. He had barely met her, barely knew her, and yet he remembered the moment he signed the contract, the way his pen shook, the way doubt pressed against him like a hand on his back. He wondered now what had pushed him to gamble everything on a stranger. Outside, thunder rolled across the coast, low and unsteady. The power flickered again. Water kept falling onto the armchair, soft but relentless. Michael stood there, heart thudding, listening to the storm press in from all sides. And as he watched the leather darken, he couldn't shake the question rising in his chest, a question that chased him back through the weeks to the moment he'd first seen her name. What had made him choose her? And why did it feel like the first real choice he'd made in years? 3 weeks earlier, the elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic sigh, and Michael saw her before she saw him. Elena Cruz stepped out with a measured stride, her heels clicking once against the polished floor before she paused to take in the office. She didn't look around with admiration the way most candidates did. She assessed, noted, judged, like someone evaluating the bones of a house she might or might not be willing to save. It was that steady, unhurried gaze that caught him off guard. She didn't seem like a woman arriving for an interview. She seemed like someone arriving to deliver news. "Mr. Harrington." Her voice carried a trace of Texas warmth beneath a layer of professionalism, like sunlight hidden behind a cloud. She didn't smile. She didn't extend her hand right away. Instead, she studied him for one quiet beat, as if deciding something. Michael felt a flicker of defensiveness rise inside him, unwanted and unfamiliar. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Elena, thank you for coming in. Please, I'll stand." She set her leather portfolio on the conference table, unopened. "This won't take long." He blinked. Most candidates entered his office, eager to please, eager to fit. She was the opposite, controlled, grounded, on a mission. Something in him braced. "All right," he said, keeping his tone even. "Let's start." She lifted the portfolio, finally opening it. He expected pages of proposals, slides, something polished. Instead, she pulled out a single sheet of paper marked with handwritten notes and a thin underline of red ink. "I'll begin with the obvious," she said. "Your brand feels lonely." The words hit harder than he expected. "Lonely?" he repeated. "Yes." She didn't soften it. "It feels disconnected. Out of time. Out of touch. Like it's preserved in glass instead of lived in. The promotional material, the tone, the imagery, it all looks like it's trying to remember the 1,990 seconds. Heat crept into Michael's neck, and he forced himself to breathe through it. He had hired consultants before, confident ones, bold ones, but never someone who spoke to him as though she were diagnosing a failing heart. "You've only been reviewing our materials for a week," he said. "That's a quick conclusion." I spent the last 7 days going through every public-facing asset you have. Website, print campaigns, customer reviews, even the old archives. She looked up. Your brand used to feel warm, familiar. A low rush of wind passed by the floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying the faint hum of the city below. Michael crossed his arms to steady himself. You don't mince words, do you? I don't believe in wasting time, she replied. He tried again to take control of the room. Elena, why don't you have a seat? I'm fine standing. She angled her body slightly toward the window, as if the city helped steady her. And we don't need to go through formalities. You hired me because your team told you I could fix what's broken. For a moment, the room felt too warm. Michael moved to the table and picked up the sheet she'd placed there. Her handwriting was neat but firm, each line written with deliberate pressure. You wrote this yourself, he said. I did. No slides? No. Why? Because you don't need a presentation, she said. You need someone willing to tell you the truth. Michael set the page down and met her eyes. They were steady, dark, and unflinching eyes that had seen disappointment before and promised to never be the one delivering it again. There was no arrogance in her tone, only a calm certainty that unnerved him more than aggression would have. You said the brand feels lonely, he said. What does that mean for customers? It means nothing draws them in. For experience. Not for polished brochures. Your brand doesn't speak to anyone's life anymore. Not the young, not the aging, not the people looking for meaning. She folded her arms lightly. Not defensive, just grounded. It feels like a place waiting for someone who isn't coming back. A quiet discomfort settled in his chest. His father used to say something similar, years ago, when the lodge was full of families and laughter. Michael pushed the thought away. And what do you propose we do? He asked. That depends on you. Her tone sharpened, not harsh, but honest. If you want someone to confirm your existing strategy, fire me now. If you want someone to challenge you, I'm the right hire. The room went still. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't bravado. It was a line she drew with full clarity. She would not work for a man who only wanted obedience. Michael closed the folder slowly, thinking about the board's pressure, the storm outside, the weight of the lodge that was falling apart. And yet the thing that unsettled him most in this moment wasn't his failing properties. It was her insistence that he really choose between comfort and change. He studied her face for signs of judgment or impatience, but found neither. Instead, he saw a woman who had built her walls carefully, who had learned to stand her ground long before she walked into his office. Someone who refused to be anyone's yes-woman. Someone whose conviction could either save his company or dismantle everything he thought he knew. Why did her bluntness cut deeper than the board's threats? He didn't yet have an answer, but the question stayed with him as she waited for his next word with patient, unwavering eyes. She slid a stack of reports toward him like a verdict, the papers landing with a muted thud on the oak conference table. For a moment, neither of them moved. The mid-morning light filtered through the tall windows, catching on the sharp edges of the folders, making the room feel colder than it should have. Michael glanced at the stack, then at Elena, who stood with her arms lightly crossed as though bracing for impact. These are the last 15 years of your brand's public-facing strategy, she said. I highlighted patterns you need to see. He lifted the first folder, feeling an unexpected heaviness in his hand. The charts were clean, the summaries concise, the notes written in her firm handwriting. It was the clarity that unnerved him most. No consultant had ever delivered bad news this plainly. They usually softened it with buzzwords, optimism, or more often flattery. Elena did none of that. Your occupancy spikes every time you host a nostalgia-driven promotion, she continued. Holiday traditions, family reunions, memorial weekends. Anything tied to the past. She tapped the chart. Your decline happens everywhere else. Michael skimmed the lines, seeing dips where he expected stability, slow drops where he'd convinced himself there were plateaus. He tightened his grip on the folder. We've always positioned ourselves as classic, he said. Timeless. Timeless doesn't mean frozen, she replied. You're selling memory, not meaning. She said it without malice, but it landed with the weight of a confession he didn't want to make. He cleared his throat. Our guests like familiarity. Your guests are aging out, she said gently. The new generation wants connection. Story. Purpose. They want places that feel alive. Her eyes met his. Your brand feels like it's waiting for someone who isn't coming back. He flinched at that, more than he meant to. She noticed he saw it in the small shift of her expression, but she didn't push. Instead, she laid out another report, this one thinner, with a faded logo in the corner. This is your father's branding guide, she said. I found it in the archives downstairs. The cover made his chest tighten, the old pine tree emblem, the handwritten annotations from a man who believed warmth mattered more than polish. Michael opened the booklet, running his thumb along its frayed edge. The pages smelled faintly of dust and cedar. He remembered being a boy, watching his father sketch out logos at the kitchen table, coffee steaming beside him. He remembered how proud he'd been when the first lodge opened, how alive he'd looked. Your father understood people, Elena said quietly. He designed for families, for stories, for belonging. Michael kept his eyes on the page. Things changed after he died. Yes, she replied. They changed because the world changed, but your brand didn't. He set the booklet down slowly. A dull pressure grew behind his eyes, the kind that came before a headache or an argument. It's easy to criticize with hindsight, he said. This isn't hindsight, she answered. It's pattern. He exhaled through his nose, fighting the rising heat of defensiveness. He'd spent years trying to honor his father's legacy, to keep the business afloat, even as competition tightened and technology advanced faster than he could adjust. He had weathered financial storms, staffing shortages, aging buildings, but nothing bruised him like hearing he had misunderstood the heart of the company his father built. You're quiet, she said. I'm listening. Good, she said softly. Because most people don't. That line hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. There was no arrogance in it, only worn experience. She had delivered hard truths before, and people had dismissed her. He could see it in her posture, in the way she held herself with controlled precision as if expecting dismissal again. She stepped closer, opening the final report. This is a sentiment analysis of customer reviews from the last decade. Words that came up most often: dated, cold, impersonal. A few called it beautiful but hollow. Michael's stomach turned at the last one. Hollow. That was the one word he never wanted associated with anything he touched. Look, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. I know we have weaknesses. Every brand does. But you're painting a picture like we're one bad quarter away from collapse. Her eyes softened. And for the first time since entering his office, she lowered her guard just enough to show something like empathy. I'm painting the picture you need to see, not the one that's comfortable. He looked down at the reports again, 15 years condensed into numbers and trends he couldn't argue with. A quiet dread settled between his ribs. His father's voice echoed faintly in memory. If you ignore what hurts, you'll lose what matters. Elena sat across from him for the first time, but even sitting, she didn't look smaller. Michael, she said, I didn't come here to make you feel criticized. I came because you said you wanted change. I did, he murmured. Then answer something honestly. She leaned forward slightly. Are you willing to change, or do you just want to say you tried? He froze. No board member had ever asked him that. No consultant, no advisor. That question cut through every shield he'd built, slicing right into the part of him that feared becoming a caretaker of a dying legacy rather than a leader of something living. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elena waited. No impatience, no judgment, just a steady, unwavering gaze that unsettled him more than the storm outside his office window. Why did her respect matter to him suddenly more than the board's approval? More than the numbers on the quarterly report? He didn't know. But the question lingered long after she stopped speaking, settling into the quiet space between them like a truth he wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed, and she went pale, not with surprise, but with the unmistakable stiffness of someone cornered. The sound cut through the hum of the engine as Michael's SUV wound along the narrow highway that hugged the Maine coast. Outside, the late winter sky stretched gray and low, threatening snow. Inside, the heater hummed, the windshield wipers rhythmically swiping away the first mist of flurries. Elena didn't reach for the phone at first. She stared at it, jaw clenched, her shoulders tightening as though bracing for a blow she'd felt before. Michael glanced sideways, hands steady on the wheel. "No," she said too quickly. Then, after a beat, the phone buzzed again, rattling slightly in the cup holder. When she finally picked it up and looked at the caller ID, her breath caught. Color drained from her face. The firmness that usually defined her posture softened into something brittle. Michael didn't miss any of it. She swiped to answer and turned toward the passenger window, speaking in Spanish, her voice sharp, low, a tone he hadn't heard from her before. Even without understanding the words, he felt the tension. Something in her cadence trembled, like she was fighting to hold a line that kept shifting beneath her. "¿Por qué estás llamando? Te dije que no vuelvas a marcarme." Michael didn't understand the details, but he understood pain. The way her hand pressed hard into the armrest, the veins in her wrist taut, told him more than the words did. Whatever this was, it wasn't a casual call. Elena, the voice on the other end, said he could hear it faintly, too smooth, too controlled. She cut him off sharply. "Basta ya," the argument heated. Her voice rose, then dropped again to a quieter, fiercer place like someone holding back tears with teeth clenched. Michael slowed the SUV, easing off the gas. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't pretend not to see her shaking hand. The wind picked up outside, blowing sheets of snow across the road. He lowered his speed even more until they were crawling along the shoulder. When she finally ended the call, her thumb hovered over the screen as though afraid the voice could climb back through it. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, breathing shallowly, the phone still gripped too tight. "Elena," he said gently, "are you all right?" "I'm fine." The words were clipped and fragile. "You don't look fine." She shut her eyes, steadying herself with a long inhale that didn't quite reach her lungs. "That was Marco," she said finally, the name falling from her tongue like something bitter. Michael's brow tightened. "The business partner you mentioned?" She nodded once. "And my ex-husband." The SUV was quiet except for the wipers brushing snow aside. Michael kept his hands at 10 and 2, steady, giving her space. He wasn't supposed to have this number. She swallowed hard. "I changed everything when I left Texas. My phone, my email, my address. I thought I'd covered my tracks." "What did he want?" Michael asked softly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Outside, the snow thickened, turning the road into a white blur. Elena's breath fogged the window as she leaned her forehead against it, eyes closing again. "It sounded like more than just a call," he said. Her laugh was hollow. "He doesn't call just to talk. He calls to remind me. He can still find me." Michael felt a slow burn build in his chest. Not anger exactly, but something protective, something he hadn't felt in years. He stayed quiet, knowing the wrong question could make her shut down entirely. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then, with her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I shouldn't have answered." "Why did you?" "Because I'm tired of being afraid of him." The last word hung between them like a crack in freezing ice. Michael exhaled slowly. She straightened a bit, pulling her coat tighter around her. "He used to be my partner. We built a small agency together. He talked big, charmed everyone, made me believe we were equals." Her voice tightened. "We weren't. He handled clients with flattery. I handled everything else. And when the business started growing, he started taking credit, making backdoor deals, hiding things from me." Michael kept his eyes on the road, giving her the dignity of not staring. "When I confronted him, he told me I was paranoid, that I was too emotional to understand business, that he was the reason we were getting anywhere." Turns out he was getting somewhere, just not with me. He'd been funneling clients to a second company under his name. She rubbed her forehead, her fingers trembling. When I left, I took what was left of my savings and started over. I thought distance would be enough. Michael's hands tightened on the wheel. It wasn't. No, she whispered. It wasn't. The SUV crept past a frozen lake, the ice reflecting the bleak winter sky. Elena stared at it, her breath unsteady. Michael had seen her in meetings, the confidence, the precision, the sharp angles of her expertise. Seeing her like this felt like watching a stone pillar show a fracture for the first time. "What did he say this time?" he asked gently. She turned her phone face down in her lap. "He said he knew where I was headed, that I shouldn't think he's out of my life just because I crossed state lines." Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine, unrelated to the winter storm. "He's reminding me he can," she said, her voice barely audible. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hiss of tires on slush. Then she whispered, "He found me." Michael looked at her, then really looked. Her eyes were glassy but determined, her jaw tight. Her posture pulled inward as if trying to shield something tender beneath. Fear and defiance tangled inside her in a way that made his chest tighten. He didn't know exactly what she left behind, but now he knew it was coming for her. And he didn't know why that realization hit him harder than it should have. Thunder cracked so sharply that the windows shuddered, and Elena finally stopped pretending she wasn't afraid. The sound rolled through the old library like something alive, rattling the glass cabinets and stirring dust from shelves lined with forgotten travel guides. A flash of white light filled the room, followed by another boom that made her flinch visibly. Michael closed the heavy wooden door behind them, shutting out the draft from the hallway. The storm had swept in faster than expected, trapping them upstairs while the staff checked for leaks and power issues. He gestured toward one of the chairs near the fireplace, an old stone hearth, now cold because the chimney needed repairs, but she stayed standing, arms crossed tightly. "Storms bother you," he said quietly. "It's not the storm," she whispered, though her voice told him otherwise. Another clap shook the window panes, and her breath hitched. She turned her back to him, pretending to study a row of hardbound atlases. Michael stepped closer but kept a respectful distance, sensing the thin line between what she could allow and what would push her too far. "You don't have to act like nothing's happening," he said. Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm not acting." "Elena." The single word broke something in her posture. She closed her eyes, one hand lifting to her forehead. Her fingers pressed tight as though bracing herself from an old, familiar ache. "It's stupid," she said. "I'm 39 years old. Storms shouldn't bother me." He didn't say anything. He waited. And for reasons she didn't understand, that patience undid her more than pressure would have. She moved toward the table at the center of the room and placed both hands on it. The wood creaked softly beneath her weight. "He used storms," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Marco, when we were still together." Michael's breath steadied. "Use them? How?" She let out a shaky exhale. "To corner me, to have conversations I didn't want to have. When thunder hit, he'd say it made me soft, more pliable, easier to sway." She shook her head, ashamed. "I hate that he was right." Even now, lightning flashed again, lighting her profile in an unforgiving white. She looked smaller than she usually allowed herself to appear. The strong lines of her posture softened into something weary and unguarded. "He didn't just take clients," she continued. "He took my confidence, piece by piece, in ways nobody else could see." Michael approached slowly and pulled out a chair, but didn't sit. He waited until she met his eyes before easing into it. "You don't owe me any of this," he said gently. "I know," she whispered. "But I'm tired of holding it all together like it never happened." The storm rumbled, deeper this time, and Elena winced. She moved to one of the chairs opposite him, sitting rigidly at first. Then, slowly, she let her back rest against the cushion. It looked like surrender, exhausted, reluctant, and necessary. "For years," she said, "I worked harder than anyone I knew. 70-hour weeks. No vacations. I thought if I just kept building, eventually the ground beneath me would stop shaking. Marco liked the version of the business that made him look good. The polish, the part where he swooped in and charmed clients. But the foundation? I built that. I gave everything to it. Michael listened, hands folded loosely, his jaw set but calm. When he started that secret firm with his brother, he used my own strategies, my own research against me. He told clients I was unstable, emotional, difficult to work with. Her voice tightened. He said they'd be better off with him. And when I confronted him, he turned it around, made it sound like I'd imagined the whole thing. Gaslighting, Michael said softly. She nodded. He was so good at it, I started to believe him. Started to doubt my memory, my instincts, myself. She clasped her hands together tightly in her lap. And when everything fell apart, when the clients left, he told me I'd never rebuild without him. Michael leaned forward slightly. You rebuilt. Barely, she whispered. Leaving Texas wasn't just about getting away from him. It was about getting away from the version of myself he made me believe I was. The storm swelled again, thunder rolling long and low across the roof like a warning. Elena's fingers tightened on the arm of the chair, her knuckles pale. She exhaled shakily. I don't trust my own judgment anymore, Michael. That's the truth. Her eyes glistened, though she didn't cry. I second-guess everything. Every decision, every person. I don't even know if coming here was smart or just desperate. He let her finish, let the silence settle just enough before responding. You made the right call, he said. Not because of me. Not because of this lodge. But because you chose to move towards something instead of letting someone push you into the shadows. Her breathing slowed, her eyes dropping to the floor. For the first time since the storm began, she looked less like she was bracing for a hit and more like she was finally letting one land and finding she could survive it. The wind howled against the windows, shaking the old frames. The two of them sat in the dim, storm-lit library, surrounded by shelves that smelled faintly of paper and time. The moment held more weight than either of them had planned for. More truth than either had expected. Elena wiped her thumb across her cheek, though no tear had fallen. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Michael's chest tightened with an answer he didn't dare voice. Instead, he said, because you shouldn't have to carry it alone. Her eyes lifted to his tired, raw, uncertain. And he wondered, with a quiet ache he didn't fully understand, why he suddenly wanted to protect her more fiercely than he wanted to save his own hotel. Lightning lit the room, flooding the old library with a harsh white glow before plunging everything back into dim amber. For a single breath, they weren't CEO and employee. They weren't two professionals bound by caution and titles. They were simply two exhausted people sitting in the half-dark, carrying scars that still ached in the quiet. Michael watched the light disappear from the window, leaving only the soft glow of the table lamp between them. The storm had eased but not ended, rain still lashed against the glass. The room smelled faintly of old paper, and the dust stirred earlier in the night. Elena sat across from him, shoulders lowered now, the tightness of her earlier confession lingering in the delicate lines around her eyes. He couldn't shake what she had said. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. The words had lodged in his chest like a splinter he couldn't pull free. You don't have to keep talking, he said softly. You've given enough for one night. I know. She angled her face away slightly. But stopping feels harder than continuing. He nodded. He understood that too well. The momentum of pain, once released, didn't shut off simply because the room grew quiet. A low rumble shook the walls again. Elena's hand curled around the arm of her chair, not as tightly as before, but enough for Michael to see the tension lingering beneath her composed exterior. Without thinking too hard because thinking would stop him, he reached across the small gap between them and touched her hand. Just a steadying gesture, nothing more. But her fingers trembled under his. She didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them moved. The storm murmured beyond the windows, the library settling into a deeper hush, as if recognizing something fragile forming in its walls. Her eyes lifted to his, dark and searching. "This isn't what you signed up for," she whispered. "I didn't sign up for anything," he said gently. "But I'm here." Lightning flickered again, softer this time, illuminating the weariness in her shoulders and the vulnerable tilt of her mouth. She looked like a woman who had spent years bracing for impact, only now realizing she was allowed to rest, even if only for a moment. Michael brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "If my hand makes you uncomfortable." "It doesn't," she said too quickly, a tremor passing through the words. He waited, giving her space to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. The moment stretched, soft and uncertain. He could feel the warmth of her skin under his palm, the slight tremble just beneath the surface. It struck him how long it had probably been since anyone held her hand without wanting something in return. When he leaned in a little, she didn't move. She simply watched him, breathing shallowly, her eyes flicking to his lips once before darting away as if ashamed of the impulse. "Elena," he said, voice low. She didn't answer. He closed the remaining distance slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, and when his lips touched hers, it was the lightest imaginable kiss, more question than act, more hope than certainty. For a heartbeat, she didn't respond. Then she exhaled shakily and kissed him back, just once, gentle, hesitant, as if she were rediscovering something she'd lost long ago. Her hand lifted, fingers curling weakly into the sleeve of his sweater, pulling him a fraction closer. Thunder rolled again, but she didn't flinch this time. It was a brief moment, a breath, a warmth, a question hanging in the charged air. When she pulled back, it wasn't abrupt, it was slow, almost reluctant, her lips brushing away from his like she was afraid of lingering too long. Her forehead rested lightly against his, for one suspended second before she straightened, retreating to the edge of her chair. "We can't," she whispered. He swallowed. "No, you don't." She shook her head. "It wasn't a mistake," he said quietly. Her laugh was small and pained. "You don't get to say that. I've lived the consequences." He leaned back slightly, trying to give her space without severing the connection completely. She stared at the floor for several seconds, before lifting her eyes again. Her voice soft and trembling. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Michael." The words stopped him. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She wasn't asking for romance. She was asking for honesty, real honesty, the kind he wasn't sure he'd ever been asked for before. Outside, rain softened to a whisper against the windows. The library felt smaller suddenly, intimate in a way neither had intended. "Elena," he said softly, "I didn't plan this. I didn't walk into this room expecting." He let the sentence trail off, unsure how to finish without saying too much. She wrapped her arms around herself, rubbing her palms along her sleeves as though trying to warm a part of her body the storm couldn't reach. "We should forget it," she whispered. "The kiss, the moment, all of it. Do you want to forget it?" She hesitated just long enough for the truth to flicker across her face. "That doesn't matter," she said. "It's safer if we do." Michael felt something inside him pull tight, a thread winding around something he couldn't yet name. He didn't push, he didn't argue, but he didn't look away either. She stood slowly, her breathing uneven. "When the storm passes, we should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." He nodded, though the air between them still hummed with everything unsaid. As she reached for the door, she paused, one hand on the old brass handle. The lamp cast a warm light on the curve of her shoulder, the fragile set of her spine. Without turning back, she whispered, "Let's just pretend it didn't happen," but her voice trembled on the last word. And Michael wondered how two people could pretend something didn't exist when it had already changed the room around them. By Monday morning, she was a stranger again. Michael saw it the second she walked into the lodge's conference room, shoulders squared, chin lifted, her expression composed with almost surgical precision. Not a tremor, not a hint of the woman who had shaken in last night's stormlit library. She greeted him with a polite nod, nothing more, nothing less. "Morning," she said, brisk and businesslike. So that was it, a single word, clipped and neutral, carving a clean line between them. Michael returned the greeting, though his voice felt heavier than he expected. She didn't look at him long enough to notice. Instead, she spread her folder across the table, sliding charts and renovation sketches into a neat arrangement, that left no room for the memory of her warm breath against his cheek. No room for hesitation, no room for anything. She jumped into the agenda with sharp efficiency, detailing occupancy swings, brand inconsistencies, staffing gaps, her voice steady, almost cold. Not once did she pause to meet his eyes. Not once did she falter. He felt the emptiness early, somewhere near his ribs, a hollowness that surprised him with its immediacy. He had known she would pull away. Elena was nothing if not disciplined, but he hadn't expected the distance to feel like this. A locked door, a drawn curtain, a returned boundary he hadn't realized he'd grown accustomed to crossing. "Here," she said, sliding a page toward him. Projected turnaround timeline. Her fingertips brushed the paper. Not him. 3 inches of air, and yet it felt like a wall. Michael nodded, scanning the chart even though he wasn't actually absorbing any of it. His mind kept returning to last night. The way her voice cracked when she'd said she didn't trust her own judgment. The careful, trembling way she'd kissed him back. The fear in her whisper when she told him not to make promises he couldn't keep. She was gone now, not physically, but in every way that mattered. He forced himself to focus. But every time she spoke, he felt the same quiet ache, the same question tugging at him. What exactly had changed between night and morning? Or had nothing changed, except his awareness of what he now wanted? After finishing her presentation, Elena clicked her pen shut with a crisp sound, gathering her papers as though eager to escape. "I'll meet with the operations team at noon," she said. "I should have early assessments by this afternoon." "That's fine," Michael said, but the words came out rougher than intended. She hesitated just a flicker, a quick glance toward the window, as if recalibrating something inside herself, then nodded and stood. She walked toward the door without the smallest pause, her heels marking steady, decisive taps against the old wooden floor. He watched her go, feeling an unexpected frustration twist inside him. Not anger, exactly. Something subtler, something like regret brushing against longing, the two tangled together in a way that felt unfairly familiar. He stood abruptly. "Elena," she froze, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. The back of her coat rose and fell with a small, controlled breath. Michael's mouth went dry. He didn't have a script for this. He didn't know what version of himself he was allowed to be in this moment. Boss? Man? Something unspoken in between? Too many lines blurred in that stormlit library, and now each one felt like a tripwire. He took a step forward. "Can we talk about—" But before he finished, she turned the knob and slipped out, letting the door shut softly behind her. Not a slam, not dramatic, just a gentle, quiet exit that somehow echoed far louder than anger would have. The sound settled in the room like dust. Michael stood there, hand half raised, feeling foolish, feeling old, feeling everything he worked so hard not to feel. He let his arm fall and walked back toward the table, bracing his palms on the wood. The sketches and charts blurred. His divorce had ended years ago, and he had convinced himself he was fine better off, but now, staring at the empty doorway, he felt the familiar ache of someone who had gotten too good at choosing loneliness, too used to avoiding anything that required vulnerability. He remembered the nights after the divorce, when the house felt too echoing, too quiet, when the only warm light came from an old lamp he never turned off. He remembered telling himself that clarity was better than companionship, that independence was better than disappointment. But that had been survival, not choice. He hadn't wanted anyone in a long time. Certainly not with this intensity, this persistent pull he felt toward Elena. She challenged him, argued with him, shook him awake in ways he didn't expect. And last night, in the storm's glow, he'd seen something in her eyes that mirrored his own, a tired want. A quiet yearning. A painful fear of history repeating itself. Now she was pretending it never existed. He sank into the chair she'd occupied earlier, tracing the indentation her presence had left in the fabric. That small hollow felt more real than the distance she had constructed this morning. He wanted to march after her, ask her why she was running, demand she tell him the truth she was burying. But he stopped himself, gripping the armrests with steadying hands. Pushing her now would only make her disappear faster. And yet, doing nothing felt unbearable. Out the window, the sky hung gray and swollen with the last remnants of the storm. Below, the lodge staff hurried across the courtyard, clearing branches and mending broken shingles. Life moved on, but inside him, nothing settled. He sat back slowly, exhaling through his nose, trying to quiet the question he didn't want to face. Was she running from him, or from the part of herself she didn't trust? The thought lingered heavy, unresolved, left hanging in the quiet room like the echo of the storm that had passed but refused to be forgotten. Michael's assistant looked uneasy the moment she knocked. She leaned halfway into the doorway, fingers clenched around her tablet as if holding it steadied her. "There's a visitor," she said quietly. "He says it's urgent." Michael didn't think much of it at first. Most people who pushed their way into a CEO's schedule believed their needs were urgent. But then she added, "He asked for you by name. And he insisted you'd want to hear him out." Something in her tone, hesitant, troubled, pulled Michael upright in his chair. "Who is he?" She drew a breath, glancing behind her as though the man might materialize. "A Mr. Marco Alvarez." The name dropped through the air like a stone. Michael felt his jaw tighten before he could control it. He set down his pen slowly. "Send him in." She hesitated. "Are you sure? He's—" "Yes," Michael said, sharper than intended. "Send him in." She disappeared, and for a moment Michael remained motionless, hands resting flat on his desk. He had never seen Marco in person, but he had a clear image from Elena's trembling voice, from the way she wrapped her arms around herself when speaking of him. A man who stole clients. A man who sabotaged reputations. A man who framed her, then followed her across state lines with entitlement sharpened into obsession. The door opened. Marco Alvarez stepped in with a smile that seemed to have been practiced in a mirror, a measured, handsome curve of lips that never reached his eyes. He wore an expensive coat, reins still clinging to the shoulders, and he walked with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the world bent for him. "Mr. Harrington," he said warmly, extending a hand as if they were old friends. Michael didn't stand. He didn't take the offered hand. "What do you want?" Marco lowered his arm without embarrassment. His smile only widened, as though he enjoyed the challenge. He settled into the chair uninvited, crossing one leg over the other. "I came because I think we have a misunderstanding between us," he said. "About Elena." "About Elena." The sound of her name from his mouth made something cold curl in Michael's chest. "What misunderstanding?" Michael asked evenly. Marco sighed dramatically, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "She's going through a difficult phase. Always has. Very emotional, very reactive. You know how some women are." The words landed like a strike. Michael felt a pulse of anger in his temples. Slow, steady, dangerous. "You came all the way to Manhattan," he said. "To tell me that?" "I came," Marco replied, leaning forward, "because she listens to you, and I need someone she respects to remind her of a few truths. She tends to—" His hand fluttered dismissively. "Get carried away with her feelings." The room grew smaller. Michael's fingers curled against the armrests of his chair. "Feelings," he repeated. "Yes," Marco said lightly. "She's always been unstable that way." "Brilliant, yes, but she spirals. I'm sure you've seen glimpses already. That's why You need to stop talking," Michael said softly. Marco blinked, uncertain. It seemed he hadn't expected pushback. "I know she's put certain ideas in your head about me. But couples fight, business partners step on each other's toes, things get exaggerated. She's dramatic, that's all." Michael stood. The air shifted instantly. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Marco said with a nervous chuckle. "But I'm trying to help you." "You don't know me," Michael said. "You don't know what I care about, and you have no idea what I've seen these last few weeks." Marco raised his chin. "I know she's manipulating you." Michael stepped closer. "The only manipulation I've seen," he said quietly, "is sitting in front of me." Marco's confident smile faltered for the first time. Michael continued, voice low and controlled, the way a man speaks when restraining an emotion that could break barriers if unleashed. You showed up uninvited. You spoke about her as if she were property. You dismissed her, belittled her, rewrote her story to fit whatever version makes you feel powerful. Marco bristled. Now, wait, no. Marco's face darkened. You think she's going to choose you? A man twice her age, stuck in a failing family business. Something inside, Michael snapped, not with sound, but with clarity. He moved forward, not aggressively, but with a finality that made Marco stand without being asked. Michael opened the door himself, stepping aside just enough. You will not come here again, Michael said. Not to my office, not to the lodge, not anywhere near her. Marco scoffed, though his eyes flickered with uncertainty. She's unpredictable. You're going to regret this. Michael held his gaze steady. The only thing I'd regret, he said, is letting someone like you stay 1 second longer. For a moment, neither man breathed. Then Marco stepped out. Michael closed the door with a controlled click, a gesture far quieter than the storm in his chest. He leaned his forehead against the wood for a long second, letting the anger drain enough for thought to return. He hadn't lost control, not fully. But something in him had broken loose. Something he hadn't felt in years. Protectiveness. Sharp and unyielding. Not because Elena was weak, she wasn't, but because she had been hurt enough. He sank back into his chair, breathing hard. And then the thought hit him. What will she say when she learns he intervened? He wasn't sure if she would thank him, or walk away for good. The uncertainty lingered like a tightening knot in his chest, refusing to ease. She walked in just as Marco slammed the door behind him, and her face drained of color. The hallway light framed her in a pale glow, her breath catching, eyes fixed on the space where he had stood a second earlier. She looked as if she'd been punched, not loudly, not violently, but in the deep, wordless way that steals all the air from a person. Elena, Michael said, stepping forward. She held up a hand, stopping him cold. He was here? Uninvited, Michael replied, and he's gone. Her jaw tightened, but the rest of her body seemed to weaken. She stepped inside his office slowly, as if her legs weren't entirely steady. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, quieter than Marco's exit, but heavier somehow. Why did you talk to him? She asked, voice thin. He came to me, Michael said. I didn't. No. Her voice cracked. Why did you talk to him? Michael felt the question like a blade. Because he was lying about you. Because he was trying to rewrite what he did. And because I wasn't going to let him walk in here and you shouldn't have gotten involved. Her voice rose for the first time since he'd met her. It wasn't loud, but it trembled at the edges, frayed with fear. You don't understand what he can do, what he's done. I understand more than you think. She shook her head again, faster this time. Her breath grew quick, her hand pressing to her forehead as if trying to slow the spin of the room. This job, this new start, it's the first thing I've had in years that wasn't tied to him. If he twists this, if he makes me look unstable again. He won't, Michael said firmly. But the reassurance didn't land. If anything, it seemed to make her unravel further. If I lose this... Her voice dropped into a whisper. I lose everything. I lose everything. She wasn't crying. That would have been easier, more straightforward. Instead, she broke down in a quiet, controlled collapse, her breath hitching, her shoulders tightening, her eyes glistening but refusing to spill. It was the kind of breakdown that came from years of trying to stay composed in rooms where people wanted her undone. Michael moved closer, not touching her yet, just standing near enough for her to feel his presence. Elena, he said softly, you're not going to lose anything. She let out a small, raw sound, half laugh, half sob of disbelief. You don't get it. He can find cracks no one else sees. He turns people against each other. He makes you doubt your own memories. I barely got out before I stopped recognizing myself. He wanted to pull her into his arms, but he didn't. He waited, letting her guide the distance. She pressed both hands to her face for a few seconds before letting them drop. When she looked at him, her eyes were glossy, exhausted. I worked so hard to start over. To be strong. To be my own person again. And now one stupid visit, and I'm right back where I was. You're not, Michael murmured. You don't know that. Her breath trembled. You don't know how fast things fall apart when you've built your life on fear. He exhaled slowly. The silence settled around them, soft but tense, like a thin sheet stretched too far. I know what it's like to be alone, he said quietly. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that follows you even when you're surrounded by people. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she entered. Michael, I know what it's like, he continued, to act like you have everything under control, while the truth is, you're just trying to hold yourself together long enough to get through another day. The admission cost him something, but he let it spill anyway. I've been alone for a long time, Elena, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Her expression softened, not with pity, but with recognition. She stepped closer, stopping a foot away from him. The space between them pulsed with something unspoken, fragile, trembling. I'm not strong like you think, she whispered. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. She flinched, almost as if the compliment hurt. You don't know half of me. Then let me. Her breath caught again, but this time for a different reason. She reached for the back of his chair to steady herself, her voice lowering to a breaking point. If you hurt me, she swallowed, I don't have another restart left. Michael felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. Not a threat, not a plea. A truth stripped bare. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her every chance to step away. When she didn't, he touched the side of her arm, barely more than a brush. Elena, he said gently, I won't hurt you. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't answer. Her silence wasn't acceptance. It wasn't refusal. It was a terrified pause, the kind that sits between hope and history. Michael opened his mouth to say more, but she stepped back suddenly, as if the closeness burned. I need air, she whispered. Before he could stop her, she turned, opened the door, and slipped out into the hallway, her footsteps quick, her breath uneven. Michael remained still, hands slowly lowering to his side. Was she running from him, or from the part of herself that still wanted to believe? The emails started flooding in before sunrise, but the first shock came at 6:12 a.m., when Michael's assistant left a stunned voicemail. You canceled the gala. Sir, are you sure? Michael stood by his office window, Manhattan wrapped in a pale morning haze, the city still waking. His thumb hovered over his phone a moment longer before he set it aside, knowing there was no going back. He had canceled his biggest annual appearance, a night that usually fed the press for weeks, a night the board expected him to attend flawlessly, and all he could think about was Elena's face, the fear still lingering in her eyes when she slipped out of his office yesterday. There were choices that defined a man, he thought. Some loud, some quiet. He turned when he heard a knock. Elena stepped in, shoulders squared, expression guarded just as she'd been all week, yet her eyes flicked briefly to his, as if checking whether the world was still safe. I heard, she said softly. Half the staff is whispering about it. Let them whisper, he replied. She studied him, confusion tugging at her. Why would you cancel something that important? He motioned to the chair, but she didn't sit. She stood by the door, hands clasped in front of her, as if bracing herself. Everything with her now was a fragile negotiation between the world she feared and the world she wanted to believe in. I canceled the gala because I didn't want to go with the woman they expected me to, he said. I want to go with you. The words landed in the air like a quiet thunder. Elena didn't blink at first, didn't breathe. Her fingers tightened around each other. Michael, she said, shaking her head once. No. You don't ask someone who works for you to. This isn't about employees, he replied gently. It's about you. She took a step back, bumping lightly against the door. People will talk. They already do. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. His voice stayed calm, steady. But her pulse visibly jumped. She wrapped her arms around herself, the same way she had yesterday when the world tilted under her. If I walk into that gala with you, she whispered, they'll assume things. They'll say I slept my way into this job. I know what they'll say. He moved closer slowly, carefully. And I don't care, because I know the truth. You earned everything here, every result, every idea. It won't matter, she said. People believe the story that hurts the easiest. He stopped a few feet from her. She swallowed hard. I don't belong on your arm at that kind of event. You belong wherever you choose to stand. Her lips parted, but no words came. He could see her wrestling with something: shame, fear, a lifetime of being told she was less than she truly was. Elena, he said softly, I'm not choosing the easy option. I'm choosing the honest one. She stared at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw hope flicker through her, fear not steady, not sure, but real. I haven't been chosen in a long time, she whispered. Not for the right reasons. I'm choosing you, he said, publicly, without conditions. Her breath stuttered. She pressed a hand against the doorframe, as though grounding herself. I don't know if I can handle the noise, she murmured. You won't handle it alone, he replied. Silence stretched between them. Then, tentatively, she lifted her eyes to his. If I say yes, she whispered, everything changes. Maybe it's time something did. Another long moment passed, her thoughts moving across her face like shadows. Fear, disbelief, longing. The memory of every betrayal that had taught her not to trust moments like this. She exhaled shakily. Are you sure? She asked. About me? Yes, he said without hesitation. Her gaze lowered, then lifted again, braver this time, though still trembling. When she spoke, her voice was barely a breath. Okay. Michael's shoulders softened, relief and something warmer settling into him. She didn't smile, not fully, but her lips curved slightly, the smallest sign of surrender to hope. I'll go with you, she whispered. But I'm terrified. He nodded. So am I. Another silence, but this one gentler. The kind that emerges when two people step towards something unknown together. She finally stepped away from the door, moving closer to him, stopping within arm's reach. Her hand brushed his, accidental or intentional. He couldn't tell, but she didn't pull away. I'm trusting you, she said quietly. I won't, she nodded once, eyes glistening. Then she stepped back, clearing her throat, reclaiming her professionalism like a coat she wasn't ready to take off yet. I need to choose a dress, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Choose one you love. She hesitated at the doorway, fingers resting on the frame, her voice soft but clearer than before. What will the world do when they see us together? Michael looked at her, feeling the question settle deep inside him. We'll find out, he said. But as she left the office, her steps light but uncertain, he wondered, not what the world would do, but what it might cost them. Healing didn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It came in the small hours of morning, in the soft hum of coffee brewing in the lodge kitchen, and in the quiet way Elena and Michael began moving around each other without flinching. 3 weeks after the gala, the Montauk project had finally hit its stride. The winter air still carried a hard edge off the water, but inside the lodge, life felt warmer. Staff no longer whispered nervously when Elena walked through the halls. They greeted her with nods that held respect, and Michael, who once ran meetings like performances, started showing up early, sleeves rolled, listening more than he talked. On a Thursday morning, he found her standing in the newly renovated event room, surveying the space with her pen resting thoughtfully against her lip. The Atlantic stretched beyond the wide windows, silver in the weak sunlight. What are you thinking? He asked quietly. That we're close, she said. Closer than I thought we'd be this soon. He stepped beside her, noting the faint circles under her eyes. She'd been working long hours, pouring herself into the project, as if rebuilding the lodge could somehow rebuild parts of her as well. You've done more for this place in 6 weeks than I've done in 6 years, he said. She gave a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes yet but was trying. Maybe it just needed someone who hadn't given up on it. He wondered whether she knew she was talking about herself, too. The days settled into something steady after that, shared meals when work ran late, soft laughter over misprinted signs or broken light fixtures, silent car rides that didn't feel strained anymore. She still kept some distance, but less of the fearful kind and more of the cautious kind, the kind that belonged to someone trying to relearn safety. One evening, they stayed late reviewing numbers in his private office at the lodge. The lamp cast a warm circle around them, turning the wood-paneled walls into a kind of safe cocoon. "Look at this," she murmured, turning her laptop toward him. "Engagement on the new storytelling campaign is up 23%. He looked not at the screen, but at her. The quiet pride in her voice, the strength that had resurfaced, the steadiness she was trying so hard to rebuild. "You did that," he said. "We did it," she corrected. But this time, the word didn't sound obligatory, it sounded honest. He leaned back in his chair. "Do you realize you've changed the entire culture of this company?" She shrugged. "I didn't change anything you weren't ready to change." He didn't know what to say to that, how to tell her she saw him more clearly than anyone had in years. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows lightly. Not a storm this time. Just winter reminding them it was still there, still watching. A week later, Marco tried again. A gossip site posted a grainy photo of Elena leaving the Manhattan office with the headline, "The New Woman Behind Harrington's Sudden Shift." The tone was snide, the implication sleazy. For a moment, panic flickered across Elena's face when she saw it. Her breath caught the way it had that night in the car. But something strange happened. Within hours, the story vanished. Not buried, removed entirely. She found Michael standing by his desk later that afternoon, his jaw tight, his phone still in his hand. "You handled it," she said quietly. "I did. You didn't have to." "Yes," he answered, meeting her eyes. "I did." It wasn't loud or heroic. It was something steadier, a man choosing to stand where he said he would. Her shoulders softened a little. A small release of tension he didn't comment on, but noticed. Their relationship grew the same way, softly, with boundaries that respected her fears and his. She told him when she needed space. He learned not to fill every silence. She let herself enjoy his company in brief moments, then retreat when it overwhelmed her. It was slow, but real. And for the first time in years, Michael wasn't trying to outrun his loneliness. He was learning to sit still with it, to share pieces of it. One night, he sat alone in his penthouse, scrolling through old contacts, names he'd once relied on for distraction. The list felt foreign now, the hollow past life of a man he no longer recognized. He hovered over the delete option, thumb trembling slightly. Then he did it. One by one. Dozens of numbers falling away like dead branches cut clean. It took less than a minute. Yet afterward, he sat staring at the blank space on his phone, feeling something loosen in his chest, a long-held tension unspooling into quiet. The next morning, Elena noticed something different in his eyes. She didn't ask what changed. She didn't need to. Sometimes healing wasn't spoken, it was sensed, like the first warm day after a long winter. Later that afternoon, when they walked the property together, she brushed her hand against his as they stepped around a construction tarp. Just a brush, nothing more. But she didn't pull away this time. He felt it like a small sunrise. By dusk, they stood outside the lodge, the sky turning a muted lavender over the ocean. She wrapped her coat tighter, watching the waves roll in and fade. "Things feel quieter now," she said. "Quieter is good," he replied. She nodded. "For the first time in a long while, I'm not waiting for the next blow." He didn't reach for her, didn't try to make promises. He just stood beside her, letting her steadiness settle where it needed to. After a moment, she glanced at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "What does someone do," she murmured, "when life finally gives them a little peace?" Michael wasn't sure of the answer, but he knew the question meant she was ready for the next step. Whatever that was, the wind off the Atlantic was colder than Elena expected, sharp enough to sting her cheeks. Yet the moment felt strangely warm, warmer than anything she'd known in years. She stood on the worn cliff path behind the lodge, watching the water churn below. Waves struck the rocks in slow, heavy pulses, as if the ocean itself had grown tired of winter. Michael walked beside her, his steps steady, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, He didn't speak at first. Just let the silence settle between them, the way a blanket settles over someone who's finally stopped running. I used to come up here with my father, he said quietly. Before everything got too big, too loud. She glanced at him. There was something softer in his expression, something unguarded. The kind of softness that didn't come from weakness, but from finally putting down something heavy. You picked a dramatic spot, she said, nodding toward the drop. The edge curved downward in a jagged arc, the grass thin and wind-bent. He smiled faintly. Well, you're a dramatic woman. Why? Her breath caught. He said it, almost playfully, but his eyes held something deeper, something that knew her fear and didn't shrink away from it. They kept walking until they reached the overlook, a flat space where the cliff narrowed but the view widened. The ocean stretched endlessly, a gray-blue sheet broken only by the white roll of distant surf. The lodge behind them hummed with construction noise, muffled by the wind. But up here the world felt untouched. This is the place, he murmured. For what? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. The kind of gesture that, in another life, might have sent her into panic. But his hands weren't shaking. They were calm, steady, so she inhaled slowly and let herself stand still. He opened it. Inside lay a silver pendant, simple, understated, the metal brushed to soften the shine. On its surface, numbers were engraved in small, precise lines. Coordinates. Her throat tightened. What is this? She asked, barely above the wind. The location of where we're standing, he said. Right here, this exact spot. She looked at the pendant again. The engraving caught the fading light. Not flashy, not extravagant, something meant to be held close. Why this place? She whispered. He stepped closer, close enough for his coat to brush hers. His voice was low, steady. Because this is where I realized I didn't want a legacy, he said. I wanted a life. The wind seemed to pause. He swallowed once, looking out at the water before looking back at her. For years, I thought the work was everything, the expansion, the prestige, the cost of keeping the Harrington name afloat. And then one morning, about a month after you came on board, I came up here alone. I looked at the ocean and all I felt was empty. Like everything I'd built was just noise. She blinked hard, the cold pricking at her lashes. But then I thought of you, he continued. How you fought your way back from something that should have broken you. How you walked into my office with that look in your eyes like you'd already lost everything once, and you were never going to let anyone take anything from you again. Her chest constricted. She hadn't known he saw that much. And I realized, he said quietly. Her breath trembled. He reached for her hand, not pulling, just offering. She let her fingers slip into his, the warmth of his palm grounding her. Elena, he said, voice soft but certain, I'm not giving you this because I expect anything. I'm giving it to you because this place, this moment, it changed me, and I want you to have something that proves not everything in your life will be taken or twisted or used against you. Her eyes burned suddenly, too quickly for her to hide. The kind of burn that came from years of bracing, years of refusing to soften because soft things were easier to break. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But he didn't reach for her, didn't try to rescue her. He just stood there, offering his steadiness like a lighthouse in a storm. She closed the pendant in her fist. The metal was cool against her skin, solid and real. I don't. Her voice cracked. She tried again. I don't know how to accept something like this. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to let yourself feel it. Her breath hitched, and something inside her, some old knot of fear and shame and exhaustion, finally loosened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough for her shoulders to fall, for her chest to soften, for the tears she'd been holding back for so long to spill over quietly. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle a sob. But another came. And another. This time, though, the tears didn't feel like defeat. They felt like release. Michael stepped forward, slowly, giving her room to stop him if she needed. She didn't. Her forehead touched his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his coat as if anchoring herself. "I'm so tired," she whispered into the wool. "So tired of fighting everything." "I know," he murmured, resting a gentle hand on the back of her head. "But you're not alone in it anymore. Not unless you choose to be." She let out a shuddering exhale, the kind that stripped the last pieces of her old defenses away. For the first time since leaving Texas, she wasn't trying to be unbreakable. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just feeling. The wind picked up, sweeping her hair around them, the pendant still warm in her hand. Below, the ocean crashed against the rocks, steady and unwavering. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes were swollen, her voice raw. "What happens now?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the next step had to be hers. And she felt that truth settle inside her like a new beginning. Some loves didn't rush, they settled slowly, like the last light at dusk stretching across a room, warming everything it touched. That was how the next few weeks unfolded for Michael and Elena. Not in sudden changes, but in small, steady steps that felt almost like healing disguised as routine. The lodge began to thrive in ways neither of them had fully expected. The winter storm had passed, the repairs had finished, and new guests came in with curious eyes and left with softened shoulders and better sleep. Elena's strategies, her reworked branding, her community-focused campaigns, her instinct for what people longed for seemed to seep into every corner of the old place. Even the staff who had once looked at her with caution now met her with quiet respect. Michael saw it most clearly during morning briefings. When she spoke, people leaned in. When she offered direction, they didn't bristle, they trusted. She didn't command the rooms she walked into. She changed their temperature. He watched her on one of those mornings, sunlight catching the delicate chain of the pendant at her collarbone, the coordinates resting just above her heartbeat. She still touched it sometimes, absent-mindedly, as if reminding herself the ground beneath her feet was real. Later that week, the board visited the property. Michael had expected the usual tension: frowns, pointed questions, veiled criticisms. Instead, they walked the halls with lifted brows, nodding at every turn. One of the longest-standing members clasped Michael's shoulder and said, "Feels like the old Harrington magic again." But Michael knew it wasn't the old magic. It was something new, something finally honest. That afternoon, after the board left, he found Elena sitting outside on the back terrace with 2 mugs of coffee. Steam curled upward in the cool coastal air. She handed him one without a word. He sat beside her, and they watched a pair of gulls drift across the gray sky. These quiet moments had become their new pattern, not planned, not discussed, simply formed. Sunday drives along the coastline, where they said little but shared the same view. Shared coffee in the mornings before anyone else arrived. Evenings, when they read in silence on opposite ends of the same couch, feet brushing now and then like a gentle yes between them. Michael hadn't known a relationship could feel like this grown up, steady, almost quiet in its certainty. He'd spent years mistaking intensity for affection, chaos for passion. This was something entirely different. Something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. One late afternoon, the sky dimming toward violet, he found Elena in the small garden behind the lodge, trimming a wilted rosemary plant. The wind had settled, the ocean hummed softly beyond the cliffs, and the whole scene felt like it had been waiting for the right moment to breathe. He stepped beside her. "You're becoming part of this place," he said. She smiled faintly. "I'm trying to. Still feels fragile sometimes." He hesitated, then spoke carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. "I want you to know, I'm not proposing. Not yet." Her hands paused. He swallowed, feeling the weight of honesty press against his ribs. "But someday," he continued gently, "I will." The shears slipped slightly in her fingers before she steadied them. She didn't look at him right away. She wanted the possible. Her gaze stayed on the rosemary, as if grounding herself in its subtle scent. The wind brushed a strand of hair across her cheek, and she tucked it behind her ear. For a moment, Michael wondered if he'd said too much. If he had pushed her too close to the edge of something she wasn't ready to name. Then she set the shears down, exhaled, and finally turned to face him. When that day comes, her voice was soft, steady, shaped by something deeper than fear. I want to be ready. His chest tightened, not with anxiety this time, but with a warmth that reached someplace in him he hadn't touched in years. He stepped closer, brushing a thumb gently along her knuckles. Her fingers curled around his, like they'd been waiting for the invitation. Neither of them said anything after that. They didn't need to. The promise was quiet but unmistakable. Something that would settle between them like the slow, sure light of evening. As they walked back toward the lodge, shoulder to shoulder, a few staff members passed by with smiles that weren't prying, just warm, knowing, respectful. It was the kind of response Elena had feared at first, the kind she'd braced herself against. But now she accepted it with a small, almost shy nod. Inside, the lobby glowed with amber light. Guests chatted near the fireplace. A soft jazz track played somewhere in the background. It all felt like a home being built piece by piece, not just for them, but around them. Elena paused near the stairs and looked up at the balcony overlooking the lobby, the same balcony where, weeks ago, she had first assessed the lodge with cool, distant eyes. Now her expression held something quieter, something hopeful. Michael watched her, feeling an ache he hadn't known how to name until recently. It wasn't longing anymore. It was gratitude. She touched the pendant lightly, her fingers tracing the engraved coordinates. "This place," she murmured, almost to herself. "It's starting to feel like—" But she didn't finish. She didn't have to. He leaned slightly toward her, not enough to crowd her, just enough for her to feel his presence. "What final moment ties the whole journey together?" she whispered, almost hesitant, almost teasing. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, someone appeared at the front doors, calling his name with urgency. Elena turned, brow furrowed, and the moment warm, fragile, perfect hung between them, waiting to unfold. On a quiet evening, Michael paused just outside the lodge entrance, his hand resting on the cool brass handle. Through the glass, he saw a single lamp glowing in the corner office, the soft, amber kind of light that made the room look almost like a memory instead of a workplace. The sight tugged at something deep in him, a quiet sweetness he hadn't recognized as hope in a long time. The hallways were hushed as he walked inside, the carpet softening each step. A light rain tapped against the windows, steady and gentle, like a lullaby. The building itself was humming. When he reached her door, he saw her through the glass panel, Elena sitting at her desk, a few folders open, her hair loosely tied back. Her expression wasn't tense the way it used to be when she worked late. She looked peaceful. He knocked lightly. She looked up immediately, and her face warmed with a small smile. "You're still here?" He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "I could ask you the same." She leaned back in her chair, stretching her shoulders. "Old habits," she said quietly, "but tonight it doesn't feel heavy. Just steady." He took in the space around her, the neat piles of notes, the small plant she'd brought from her apartment, the jacket draped over the back of her chair. She had made this office her own, without trying to claim it. The room looked like it had finally exhaled. Michael moved closer, resting a hand on the edge of her desk. "You've come a long way," he said. She looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "We both have." He waited, sensing she had more to say. After a moment, she continued, her voice softer. "Do you remember the day I walked in here for the first time? I felt like I was stepping into someone else's world. I didn't think I belonged. I didn't think I deserved another chance." She met his eyes then, and there was nothing guarded there, just truth. "Thank you for believing in me, when I couldn't believe in myself." He exhaled slowly, something unknotted inside his chest. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Elena, you didn't need me to believe in you. You just needed someone who didn't walk away." She blinked, her eyes shining faintly in the warm light. He stepped back only enough to lean against the window frame. Outside, guests were arriving, middle-aged couples, families carrying overnight bags, a pair of retirees holding hands as they walked through the doors. They looked comfortable, welcomed. The lodge felt alive again. She stood and joined him at the window, shoulder brushing his. "Look at them," she murmured. 3 months ago, I thought this place was sinking. 3 months ago, he replied. I thought I was. She turned to him with the kind of smile that always seemed to reach him before he fully understood it. You know, I used to think titles kept people safe. Position, authority, status. Her voice thinned slightly. But I've learned the hard way those things can disappear overnight. He nodded, eyes lowered. I used to think legacy was everything. My father believed it. My grandfather believed it. I tried to carry it like it mattered more than my own life. She studied him quietly, letting the weight of his words settle. But you, he said, lifting his gaze to hers, you gave me something better than legacy. You gave me a reason to live a life that felt real. Emotion flickered across her face, unexpected, tender, almost startled. She rested her hand lightly on his chest, not pushing or pulling, just being there. He covered her hand with his, giving it a gentle squeeze. Neither spoke for a long moment. Outside, the rain eased. The lamps along the walkway glowed against the mist, soft halos forming in the damp air. Inside, the lodge hummed with low conversation and the rustle of coats being hung. Everything felt grounded, like the world had finally slowed enough for them to catch up to it. Elena reached for the pendant around her neck. The tiny silver disc caught the lamplight as she turned it between her fingers. This, she whispered, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with something deeper. This is the first place that ever felt safe. Michael felt something rise in him, an ache, but a good one, the kind that came with understanding just how much someone trusted you. He placed his hand over hers, the pendant cool against his palm. You're safe here, he said quietly. Not because of the building, because of us. Her breath caught, and she leaned her forehead lightly against his chest. He wrapped an arm around her, slow and steady, like holding something precious he didn't want to startle. They stood there, framed by the warm glow of the office and the rain-softened light outside, watching the life they had built fill the lodge with quiet energy. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were wet but steady. Michael, do you ever wonder if maybe the best chapters don't happen when we're young? That maybe they're waiting for us when we finally stop running from ourselves? He brushed his thumb along her cheek, absorbing the question like it belonged to both of them. I don't wonder, he said softly. I'm starting to believe it. Her expression shifted into something warm and lingering, something that hinted at the life they were shaping, not rushed, not forced, simply unfolding. And as they stood side by side at the window, watching the lodge glow like a home lit from the inside out, the unspoken question settled gently between them. What if the best chapters truly began at midlife? Sometimes, healing begins in the quiet moments we never planned, for the ones where life sits beside us and whispers that it's not too late to start again. What Michael and Elena learned is something many of us forget. We carry old wounds longer than we admit mistakes, betrayals, the versions of ourselves we no longer want to be. And yet, when someone finally sees us without flinching, when they offer steadiness instead of judgment, a different kind of future becomes possible. There's also a grace in midlife that youth rarely understands. By the time we reach our 40s, 50s, 60s, the heart is no longer chasing fireworks. It's searching for a place to rest, a hand that doesn't let go when things get complicated, a home made of trust rather than perfection. And maybe that's the quiet miracle. That even after everything, love can still find us, not to erase the past, but to walk with us beyond it. Thank you, truly, for spending your time with this story. Your presence here matters more than you know. It's what keeps these gentle, human moments alive. If you feel this story brought something warm to your evening, a like, a share, or a subscribe is a small way to pass that warmth forward into someone else's day. Wishing you peace, comfort, and a little more light wherever you are tonight.